Tonight, local and state investigations are underway at one of our region's premier hospital systems.
Washington University's transgender clinic at Children's Hospital is at the center of a whistleblower investigation. This woman claims children are being harmed.
In this 23-page sworn affidavit, she outlines practices by doctors and medical professionals at the center that many are calling disturbing and, more seriously, calling acts of child abuse, including putting children.
In early 2023, a woman named Jamie Reed made headlines when she filed an affidavit with the Missouri Attorney General's office. She had been a case manager at one of the only youth gender clinics in the state, the Washington University Transgender Center. And in her affidavit, she made a number of explosive claims about the care kids were getting there. 2 days later, a first-person account of her experience was published in the Free Press.
When did you start realizing?
And she gave them an interview where she laid out some of her claims.
At the very beginning, I immediately could see that there were a lot of gaps. So in medicine, most places will have standard operating procedures. They'll have policies.
Jamie described a clinic totally unprepared for the moment.
None of those existed for this.
She said when she started in 2018, the clinic had just opened and had no formal guidelines for how it should operate. Soon, it was facing the same increase in patients as so many other clinics. Often, she said, those patients had severe psychological issues.
Horrible trauma history.
In her affidavit, Jamie wrote about kids struggling with schizophrenia, obsessive-compulsive disorder, PTSD.
There is absolutely no way that these patients were in the right mental place to be able to make any long-term decisions about their health, let alone decisions about gender transitioning as a child. And then the next thing you know, we're giving that next patient hormones too. It just kept feeling
And rather than treat those underlying issues, Jamie wrote that doctors were just prescribing puberty blockers and hormones, and routinely doing so without the willing consent of their parents.
The parents said no. These doctors would push and push and push and push. And every single visit, it would be push some more. And they'd straight up tell us this. I feel like I have been bullied into saying yes. And somehow the doctors thought that that was a true good consent.
Jamie said that after the leadership of the hospital didn't address her concerns, she quit her job at the clinic. A few months later, she filed her affidavit with the state.
I just had to go to who is there. And I live in a state where the people who are in these offices are Republicans. And I believe that they are going to do their job.
And when they do their job correctly, what happens to the transgender center you used to work at?
I do not believe it can continue to function as
you
a
want to
center.
close down.
I believe it's the only way to actually stop hurting more kids.
In going public with these claims, Jamie Reed became the first whistleblower from a pediatric gender center in the U.S. And it wasn't just that she had worked at the clinic.
She describes herself as more progressive than Bernie Sanders. Okay, so this is not a conservative that we're dealing with.
She self-identified as a progressive and as a queer woman. And she was married to a trans man. So for opponents of the care, she was an incredibly potent messenger.
She is way out in left field, and she's still, the details of her account of what's going on in there are just really, really gruesome. So
the response was immediate.
Some people may need to go to jail, Laura.
Within days of Jamie coming forward, Senator Josh Hawley from Missouri opened an investigation into the clinic.
We need an accounting of every child who was abused in this way. Every child.
And a few months after that,
Senate Bill 49 bans healthcare providers from prescribing medication or surgeries.
Missouri lawmakers, who had struggled for the previous 2 years to get the support they needed to pass a ban, were finally able to push it through. And they did it, in part, by citing Jamie's allegations. Meanwhile, parents of patients disputed her claims.
We know the whistleblower. We believe that what she's saying is right-wing rhetoric.
They said she'd become some kind of tool of the Republicans. And civil rights groups filed a lawsuit to try to stop the ban from going into effect. And by August, a hearing date was set to decide whether care could be provided while the lawsuit worked its way through the courts. So what's going on with Jamie and her testifying?
So I think she doesn't testify until 12:30, but...
And Jamie would be testifying at the hearing in support of the ban on care in Missouri. This wasn't an interview in The Atlantic or a column in the Washington Post. It wasn't a disagreement at a medical conference. This was something totally different. And it was happening right as political opposition was reaching a new high.
It is this, historic thing for someone who was actually working inside a clinic in this state to be coming out against it.
It was clearly a turning point in the story.
And I think a lot of people don't know what to make of it.
And so we went to Missouri. From the New York Times, I'm Austin Mitchell. This is The Protocol with Azeen Qureshi. Part 4, The Whistleblower.
I want to make sure everything is tied up and, rock solid before we publish.
And so this afternoon you are on calls all night?
Yeah.
What were you doing?
So this afternoon I was checking in with sources.
The hearing in Missouri was scheduled for late August, about 6 months after Jamie had first gone public with her allegations. And in that time, Azeen had been reporting on the clinic where Jamie worked. Because while conservative lawmakers had been quick to seize on her allegations and advocates had been quick to dispute them, her claims had never been fully reported out. And so Azeen had been talking to patients, parents, former employees, pediatricians, therapists. She reviewed hundreds of pages of internal documents she'd gotten from Jamie, as well as some documents and medical records from parents. And she was getting ready to publish her story.
See the light of day,
From her reporting, Azeen had been able to verify many of Jamie's claims. She confirmed that the clinic was overwhelmed with patients. At one point, they were getting 4 or 5 new calls a day, about the same number they got in a month when Jamie first started. She also confirmed that many of the kids coming in did have complex psychiatric issues, and that the clinic didn't always do psychological assessments of patients before providing medical treatment. Instead, they required a letter from an outside therapist. Azeen saw a text message from the clinic's co-director. It was sent shortly after WPATH released an update to its guidelines, co-authored by Laura and Analu, which reasserted the need for kids to have rigorous assessments. The co-director said in his text that he worried the clinic didn't have the ability to meet those standards. In her affidavit, Jamie pointed to many instances where she believed this situation had led to patients being harmed. Azeen was able to confirm several of those instances. She also found other cases independently, like a patient who had gone on to detransition who said she'd been prescribed testosterone after a single appointment without speaking to a psychologist, even though she'd previously been diagnosed with bipolar disorder. Azeen sent these findings to Washington University. A spokesperson said they couldn't comment on individual cases because of patient privacy, but said they had reviewed the allegations and concluded that, quote, physicians and staff have treated patients according to the existing standards of care. Most of the parents and kids Azeen spoke with said that had been their experience, and that Jamie's account put that all at risk.
I was just talking to parents this weekend who were like, the collateral damage she's caused by coming out with her allegations, like she just is, unimaginable.
Overwhelmingly, the parents who agreed to talk with Azeen, many of them part of a parents group associated with the clinic, said the clinic was a godsend, the only place for hundreds of miles where they could get their kids the care they needed. They said the gender care had often resolved mental health issues their kids were dealing with. Some talked about it as life-saving. And they said they felt blindsided and betrayed by what Jamie had done. One parent, whose daughter had been cited in the affidavit as an example of harm, showed Azine her correspondence with the clinic's doctors. The messages made clear that Jamie had misrepresented some of the details of the story, which made it sound more damning.
I also do wonder if some of the parents are going to be there tomorrow.
And adding to the parents' feelings of betrayal was what Jamie was about to do.
They're going to feel heartbroken. I know that.
And so, while we had come to Missouri to see how this case would play out in a courtroom, we first wanted to go see Jamie on the eve of her testimony to ask her why she was taking this unprecedented step.
And I don't really know how she feels about it. And so, yeah.
From her reporting, Azine had been able to verify many of Jamie's claims. She confirmed that the clinic was overwhelmed with patients. At one point, they were getting 4 or 5 new calls a day.
Alert, transgender care ban allowed to take effect in Alabama, appeal panel says. We just published that. It's just so crazy that this is like all happening everywhere right now, you know, and also here. Hello. Wait, there's a third dog? It's only 2.
Jamie was living in the St. Louis suburbs with her 2 dogs, 3 cats, 5 kids, and her husband at the time, Tiger, who wasn't home. After Jamie got the youngest kids to bed, we took a seat at the kitchen table.
Are you nervous for tomorrow?
I wasn't as nervous until I talked to my own attorneys a little bit ago, and he reminded me not to talk to anybody if they're in the hallway that is like protesters or mean people, and I didn't even realize that might be a...
I've definitely heard from parents, Jamie, who are like, you know, feel like their kids are collateral damage in your warpath to take down gender affirming care in Missouri and America, frankly.
Those individuals are going to be the people that are going to hold on to this the longest.
What do you mean?
The belief that they made the right choice for their kids the longest. They have to. They wrapped their kid into something, and they're going to be the ones that will never let this go. There will never be a period where they will not personally probably hate every single individual who's publicly stood in opposition to these interventions.
But also, like, what if their kids are happy and doing well?
Those interventions didn't exist 20 years ago, and their kid could have been happy and doing well if we gave them a different set of care. If their child had these exact same feelings in 1990, their child would not have had access to this. They would have had access to psychotherapy and potentially could have also ended up happy.
I guess for Austin, who has not met you before, like, you 5 years ago would be shocked, right, to hear what you're saying now. You clearly thought you were doing the right thing.
Yes. But I also thought the right thing was within guidelines and structure. And I thought the right thing was based on really solid longitudinal studies. I didn't know then what I know now.
Jamie told us that as she was becoming increasingly disillusioned with what she was seeing at the clinic, she began to do some research online. She learned other people were also questioning the care. Some of them were reevaluating the evidence that had launched this treatment model.
So
the Dutch protocol.
The Dutch did all of this basically for this one tiny cohort. How did that jump from there to here? And how the hell did GEMS open?
How did they bring an experimental procedure from a foreign country into the United States to start in a United States pediatric center and not have to have clinical research? Like, this is like clinical research ethics, like 101. And on some level, that's where it all went wrong.
But Jamie, like the clinicians who have been raising alarms about the rising numbers, the lack of assessment, all of that, still believe that there are kids who benefit from these treatments, and they believe that because they've seen it with their own eyes. And talking about Laura Edwards-Leeper, for example.
Anderson.
Laura Edwards-Leeper does not say that she supports bans on gender-affirming care.
Correct.
And so that's kind of where you diverge. And
Correct.
where it's not fair to focus on her. There was that whole letter, all the medical providers in the U.S. who said, we disagree about a lot of things.
Yes.
But
I know. Yeah.
Here's what we agree on.
Yeah.
Here's what we agree on. We agree on these bans are bad because it's legislative interference in medical care. And I'm bringing it up because we're on the
Cusp of this legislative thing.
And you're diving straight into it. I mean, you're already in it, but this feels different.
What is the other option? I believe that we have hurt patients. We hurt them. And why would I want to support anything that continues doing that?
A lot of people don't agree, right? And they vehemently disagree. What does it mean then to be harmed if you don't? A thing that the parents say a lot is, so where are all the people who are upset? And I do wonder that. Where
if we want medicine to be a consumer state, and then it all becomes patient satisfaction, right? That's not what I want medicine to be. Is that really what we want medicine to be? Is it all about, at the end of the day, is it actually just about patient satisfaction?
Can I just ask, what is the other option besides satisfaction that you're pushing for?
Actual evidence-based care that meets a gold standard of what evidence is.
Do you agree with the folks that you're working with tomorrow on all this stuff? Do you feel like you're on the same page with the Attorney General and his team?
Yeah, I mean, his team is working to uphold a law that I currently support. So yeah, we're on the same page with that.
Your lawyer has said at a presentation that is on YouTube
I said stupid shit that
the transgender movement poses an existential threat to our culture.
Well, on some level, I mean, there is queer theory that does want there to be the dismantling of the family and society. I mean, there are some theoretical...
You have an anarchist tattoo on your calf.
Yes. Yes. But...
You are a person of extremes.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean...
I guess I would just be so curious. I know we've talked about all of this a lot, but I would be so curious what Tiger would say about...
I think on some level you're focusing on one trans individual.
I'm focusing on one trans individual who you go to sleep next to every night and who, is going to take your kids to the bus stop tomorrow morning and, who has shaped your...
And he had the right to make decisions as an adult. Adults get to make choices about their own bodies that are different from children. I don't talk about it much, but it was traumatizing to work in that center. It was, I came home from work in tears and could not fall asleep at night because I knew that the next day we would have a certain patient coming in where the team was in chaos over whether or not they were actually meeting criteria, and knowing that all of my professional assessments are going to be overridden and I would have no ethical say. I am at peace and have so much more calm and sense of self on this side. I feel like a human being again.
Can I actually ask a question before your husband comes home?
Yeah.
Just one thing that it just struck me when you were speaking about your own experience while you were working at the clinic, and you weren't feeling like a whole person.
Yeah.
And you're having to push away like who you really were. It just seemed like it mirrors a lot of the experience of trans people when they are young and not able to be who they are.
So sidebar, you might not know this, but I experienced intense gender dysphoria as a child.
Okay.
Some of my first memories were very intense. I was a kid who did not understand why I didn't have certain body parts. I almost medically transitioned a number of times in my life. I bear physical scars from self-harming, experienced really difficult adolescence around it also. So I am not naive to those feelings. And one of the things that came up in the center often was really wanting those kids to get more therapeutic supports, because they were not getting therapy. They were just getting hormones. So I think it comes down to then.
At this point, Jamie grabbed a notebook and pen on the table and started drawing. On one side of a page, she drew a cluster of dots meant to represent a group of kids. On the other side, she drew just one.
There's an assumption there that medicine today can figure out who that one kid is and all the others. And the problem that I saw working in this center and this care now is that not only can people not say how they know for sure that that's the one kid that would actually long-term benefit with the least amount of medical harm, they can't even tell me or be clear about how they can identify this person, and then they also aren't trying. So if you could convince me that these centers in the country actually give a shit about figuring out who this one kid is and not just medicalizing all of these other kids, because the collateral damage right now is, it's not this kid, it's all of them. We are transitioning all of, to me, it's almost like a 15-to-1 ratio. We're transitioning medically all of these kids with the hope that we catch this one. If these centers actually really cared about that one, then they also need to really care about these other 15, because we should not be medicalizing them.
So you just don't believe that they will persist in their trans identity into adulthood? Jamie, for the story, I found dozens of parents and kids.
Sure.
And the kids are in college now and studying psychology and have a girlfriend or a boyfriend or they're just living their lives. I'm just saying, like, in terms of statistically, this diagram that you have drawn with kids that should not have been prescribed hormones and one that should have, it just does. I don't know that you know that that's the real proportion.
Again, I don't think that the way to judge the provision of medical care is customer satisfaction. It has to be evidence, longitudinal evidence.
All right, well, we should probably give you some space. Just, there are so many people that are going to feel so hurt tomorrow.
But on the flip side, gender doesn't have to be that serious, though, either. Their kid is not going to fall apart because they actually experience their natal puberty. It really is not a crisis tomorrow.
It could be.
I still don't see that. No, I actually think the best way to help these kids is to less focus on this. We're telling children you're leading, you're in charge. That does not do well with children's mental health. And I actually think as a society as a whole, we need to kind of roll back this whole let the child lead, children are no. Like, parents need to step up, and these parents needed to tell their child, even if you cannot have access to this medication at this time, your body is still perfect and whole. We will get you the help that you need. You have support. We are here. You are going to be okay. You can make it through this. Kids need to be taught resilience, and that is not that they require some intervention that demands that their body not go through its natal puberty. Like, they can survive. It is okay. That dog is probably driven the Nate. Look at these cats, too. Archie's the one that goes out. Go catch him off. Pickles, come on. Look, my watch just told me it's time for bed.
Uh-oh.
Thank you for letting me sit here.
Oh, yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you for asking good questions, too. I always appreciate dialogue, and I always want to be challenged.
Well, tomorrow will be the real one. Until tomorrow.
Get some rest.
No, I will. I sleep well. I have an episode of Star Trek to watch.
Good night.
Good night. Hope you drive back in.
So are you going to be able to bring that inside?
The next morning, Azine and I arrived at a courthouse in Springfield for the hearing. I was told that no recording of any kind is allowed.
Right, so that's why I wonder if they're going to even let our oops, sorry. Okay, if they're even going to let our phones in, you know?
They might take them. Yeah, they might take them. I'm just going to bring a notebook and my phone.
Let's see what they say.
Okay.
For now.
Well, I'm going to turn this recorder off then for now. Inside the room where the hearing was being held, the public seating area was full. About 50 people, a lot of them older, sitting on a few rows of benches. There were people wearing shirts that said, "God's disciple," and "God's children are not for sale." One man told us he was there with his church group. Azine pointed to only a few people she recognized as parents from the clinic, seated in the front row. Over the next 2 days, we would all sit through hours and hours of testimony. The state called on expert witnesses who questioned the role of medical intervention. One was an American psychiatrist who was involved in the early treatment of trans adults in the 70s. And he had worked with the Dutch clinicians, like Peggy Cohen-Ketnis, on the first WPATH guidelines that included recommendations for children and adolescents. But in the time since, he'd grown disillusioned with the field and felt that groups like WPATH had become dominated by politics and ideology, rather than by scientific process. He said that he now believed the Dutch study was too weak to support medical transition for kids. Another witness was a child and adolescent psychiatrist from Sweden. The country had first begun offering care based on the Dutch protocol, but had recently moved to a more cautious approach, and now recommended puberty blockers and hormones only in exceptional cases. He testified about similar restrictions that had recently been put in place in other Nordic countries. Through much of this testimony across these 2 days, the crowd sat quietly, fidgeting, trying to pay attention. That changed when Jamie Reed was called to the stand. People started leaning forward in their seats and whispering to each other. They seemed to know who she was. For over 2.5 hours, she talked about her experience, walking through many of the claims she made in her affidavit. As the lawyers encouraged her to expand on her account, she said clinicians would pressure parents into treatment by saying things like, "Would you rather have a dead daughter or a living son?" She said she believed the rise in demand was being driven by social contagion, that kids were seeking medical care to transition because of what they were seeing on social media or because their friends were doing it. At multiple points, people in the audience muttered to themselves and each other about the treatment that was being described. I saw people shaking their heads a lot. At one point, I heard a guy in front of me say, "horse shit." And at the same time, I saw a parent in the room, crying. There was one woman in particular who was clearly agitated by Jamie's testimony. When Jamie was talking about a medication used at the clinic with a risk of liver toxicity, the woman stood up from her seat and left the room. Azine gave me a look and then followed her out.
Hello, hello. All right, I'm outside.
After Jamie's testimony was over and I got my recording equipment from the car, I spotted Jamie standing alone just outside the courthouse.
But I know Azine's busy. I don't want to I don't want to just skip out on her, but
Well, would you be willing to talk to me for a second?
yeah.
Okay.
I can talk to you for a second.
Okay. Well, how are you feeling?
It was heavy. But it's over. Yeah.
Well, I saw when we were going on that a break earlier in the day before you testified. I saw people were coming up to you. They recognized you.
I think so. Yeah. I mean, my face has been out there, so yeah. Is Azine coming out?
As we were talking, we saw Azine and the woman that she'd followed out of the courtroom heading in our direction.
Sorry, I'm recording if that's all right. Just to let you all know.
The woman stopped a few feet away from Jamie.
Collateral damage. Ruined lives. Because of lies. So sad for me? That's my problem now? That's my problem?
This was the parent whose daughter's case had been misrepresented in Jamie's affidavit. It was a case Jamie had pointed to as one of the most egregious examples of harm she had seen at the clinic. She said the teenager had experienced liver damage after being prescribed a drug to block testosterone, and that this parent had then made a kind of threat to the clinic, saying she was not the type to sue, but that, quote, "this could be a huge PR problem for you." In actuality, Azine had learned, the patient did experience liver damage, but the medical situation had been more complicated than the affidavit had accounted for. And the girl's mother, this parent, had never threatened the clinic. When Azine went to Jamie with this, Jamie acknowledged that she'd gotten the information secondhand from the clinic's nurse. But she said it didn't change what she thought was the most important part of the story, that the kid had been harmed.
If I can help in any way or answer any questions, I don't know.
I need you to Own your truth. Okay, so here it is. I want you to tell me. The liver toxicity patient. This is a PR nightmare for you, and you're lucky I'm not the kind of person to sue. Was that said? Do you know if that was really said by a parent? Do you know?
This is tricky because I don't.
Yeah, no,
So,
do you know? Do you know? It's quoted in your affidavit.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Do you have proof that a parent said that?
It was reported to me by the nurse.
Fuck off. So why do you say it? Why do you put it in your affidavit as part of your statement? Hi, I'm Jamie Reed. I'm signing this. Own what you wrote.
And I reported what was reported to me by the clinical nurse.
So why would it go in an affidavit?
Because to me, I believed it was true because it was reported to me by the nurse.
Boo-hoo, you believed it was true. Was it true?
The affidavit is...
Was it true?
Babe, I cannot...
You have it in quotes, and I didn't say that in quotes.
Correct.
You have it in quotes.
Correct.
Quotes means quotes.
Right. The nurse said that to me as a quote. I quoted the nurse.
No, you don't say you quoted the nurse. You say you're quoting the mom. You say you're quoting the mom. This material, this text, never existed. Never existed.
So unfortunately, I don't know that it never existed. I still cannot clarify that.
I can show it to you.
I understand.
Because, you know, the last sentence is, to say it out loud, we do not regret any of the treatment.
I understand.
And they were life-saving for our daughter.
Okay. I am totally willing to engage in a dialogue if you find this helpful in any way. If this is just frustrating you, I don't want to contribute to your continued frustration. So is there anything... Okay.
Your affidavit ruined our lives.
I'm very sorry to hear that.
Ruined our lives. And it's a lie. It's based upon information you didn't have.
I don't entirely understand.
I'm not going to tell you why it ruined my life. Collateral damage. See, what happened is you put this out, and there's collateral damage all around. Me. I'm collateral damage to your getting your 5 minutes of fame.
This is not about fame. I really, truly believe.
How many interviews have you given? In general, like testifying, YouTube interviews. You know your affidavit has been read. And
that was the goal. My goal is to stop this care. My goal is to stop medically.
Based on a lie?
No. And so if you don't.
Based on a lie?
No. Honestly.
You never saw my daughter's chart.
No, but I saw every single other chart in the affidavit. That was literally the only one. And there's text message.
Put it in the fucking affidavit.
You're absolutely right. It was the last one to go in. And
it's a lie.
To my best of my knowledge, that information was true.
Well, look where it's gotten. To the best of your knowledge, has now become an attack on transgender youth getting medical care. To the best of your knowledge,
should be being prescribed these treatments.
The parent shook her head, turned, and walked to her car. Jamie headed to her own car and drove off. The next morning, the Times published a zine story about Jamie Reed, the clinic where she worked, and the testimony she had just given in support of Missouri's ban.
The New York Times obtained hundreds of documents from this whistleblower, which corroborated some of her allegations, including...
The day after that, advocacy groups criticized the story.
So GLAAD parked a truck outside of the New York Times building that says, "Dear New York Times, stop questioning trans people's right to exist and access to medical care."
Not long after, a few of the parents who Azine interviewed for the story, including the mom outside the courthouse, spoke to a trans rights news site about how they felt Jamie had been given too much of a platform by the Times. The headline of that piece was, "You betrayed us, Azine." Back in Missouri, the judge issued his order.
Missouri is moving forward with Governor Mike Parson's law banning transgender care for minors.
He allowed the ban to go into effect, while the challenge to it continued to play out in court. In 2020, there were no bans on youth gender medicine in the U.S. In 2021, Arkansas had become the first state to pass a ban. In 2022, Alabama and Arizona followed. In 2023, Utah, Mississippi, Iowa, Kentucky, North Dakota, Oklahoma, Florida, Georgia, Tennessee, Indiana, South Dakota, North Carolina, Missouri, Texas, Nebraska, Montana, Louisiana, and Idaho, they all passed bans, bringing the total number of states to have passed bans on youth gender medicine to 21. Like Missouri, many of those bans were challenged, and as they were making their way through the courts, many of those bills' sponsors spoke publicly about their belief that letting children medically transition was just wrong. Some called it child abuse. But in making their cases, they leaned on the same argument that Jamie said had convinced her to support these bans: the lack of evidence. At the same time, advocates and providers in the U.S. argued just the opposite, that the evidence was strong, saying every major medical group agreed on the necessity of this care. Each side claimed to be acting based on the science and accused the other side of being ideological.
No doubt at all what the biggest story in town is today, and it is the cash review into trans services.
And this is the world's biggest review into this whole issue of trans healthcare.
Then came a highly anticipated report out of the UK that cast both sides as ideological.
Incredibly damning. It's insane.
And claimed to answer the question of the evidence once and for all. Next time, in Part 5, the Cass Review.